Oprah Winfrey calls it a growing phenomenon. And the data backs her up. Nearly 1/3 of Americans are now estranged from a family member. Yet this mass disappearance isn't driven by hatred or trends. It's a final desperate act of self-preservation. People leave, not because they suddenly stop caring, but because caring has become too heavy, too corrosive, to keep carrying. From the outside, it looks like one of the coldest acts imaginable. From the inside, it is simply the last resort. It is survival. Survival, in this context, isn't some single dramatic act. It's a slow, almost silent retreat into solitude. From the outside, your disappearance looks like a judgment. Cold. Abrupt. To other people, it can even feel strangely cruel. But that's the paradox. A basic misunderstanding of the physics of pain in your subconscious. From the inside, it's a desperate gasp for air. The final stage of a long internal suffocation. Honestly, this is never the first choice. It's the absolute last resort. It arrives only after a long silent period of enduring, of absorbing the weight of other people's needs, of playing the role of the strong one until your own foundation quietly cracks. The real warning signs were never loud. They lived in the gradual fade. You know, the replies that took hours, then days. The plans that were gently, consistently canceled. The explanations that became shorter, then stopped altogether. This isn't someone waking up and deciding to leave. This is the final quiet collapse after the structure has been failing for years. But this endpoint, this act of self-preservation, isn't born from a single event. It's forged by two invisible pressures that have been building, quietly, often since childhood. And understanding them is the key to understanding everything that follows. First, there's a pressure that corrodes you from the inside out. Deep emotional exhaustion fused with a chronic fear of being a burden. You know, many who carry this trait learned early that their needs were an inconvenience. So you adapted. You became low maintenance. You learned to say, "It's fine," when it wasn't. You decided your capacity to endure was your currency for acceptance. And this isn't just a habit. For many, it's a neurological predisposition. A 2021 study on burnout confirmed that highly sensitive persons, or HSPs, are far more susceptible to emotional exhaustion. Your nervous system processes stimulation, emotions, social cues, environmental details more deeply. That constant high-fidelity processing pushes you into chronic overload, where withdrawal stops being a preference and becomes a biological necessity. But the exhaustion isn't only emotional, it's existential. This is the second pressure, identity fatigue. This is the exhaustion that comes from always being a function instead of a person. You are the listener, the problem solver, the stable one, the planner. Over time, the role consumes the self. This experience is, honestly, well documented in research on role burnout. The profound weariness of having your identity defined only by what you provide to others. Disappearing then stops looking like avoidance and starts looking like a desperate act of self-reclamation. It is an attempt to discover who you are in the silence, without the crushing weight of expectation. So now you can see the slow erosion, the exhaustion from giving, and the fatigue from performing. But that only explains the conditions. For collapse, not the collapse itself. There is a specific psychological trigger, an internal event that flips the switch from endurance to ejection. It's the mechanism that makes disappearing feel less like a decision and more like a law of physics. Without understanding this trigger, you're left knowing only the backstory, never the climax. This is the point where the story peaks, where the arc you've been on quietly hits its limit. The breaking point isn't a single event. It's a psychological state, emotional saturation. Picture your capacity to give as a cup. For years you've been pouring your energy, your empathy, your time into people. But the cup you're pouring into is cracked. The care you give leaks out. never filling the vessel, never being held or returned. You pour and you pour, until one day you reach for the pitcher and realize it has no weight. You're not just tired, you're empty. The act of giving is no longer possible. Psychological research actually backs this up, often linking this kind of profound depletion to insecure attachment patterns. When your fundamental needs for reciprocity and validation are chronically unmet, burnout becomes almost inevitable. That emptiness then activates a second, deeper mechanism in you, the all or nothing switch. This isn't a character flaw. It's a recognized psychological pattern, a defense mechanism your past forced you to build. When your vulnerability was repeatedly met with indifference or punishment, your subconscious absorbed a brutal rule. Partial intimacy is a threat, an unstable state that only leads to disappointment. So your mind streamlines the problem and concludes there are two safe positions left: all in, which you no longer have the resources for, or nothing at all. From that angle, distance starts to feel more rational than risking the high probability of being let down again. And so, the switch flips, the connection is cut. The constant noise of unmet expectations finally goes quiet. You'd expect peace to follow, right? But what steps in to replace the noise is a silence so profound, it's almost deafening. The walls you built to keep the pain out carry a hidden, paradoxical price. In solitude, you realize it, they work too well. At first, the cost of the wall feels like a bargain. No regret yet, only that exhale of relief. The phone, once a source of constant drain, falls silent. Your mental space, previously jammed with the weight of other people's expectations, is suddenly, shockingly, quiet. And honestly, for the first time in a long time, you can breathe again. But then that silence starts to shift. It thickens, moving from a gentle quiet into a hollow void. You might think, isn't this what I wanted? And yet something feels off. The peace you crave turns into something else. A profound absence, a deep anchoring loneliness, often threaded with faint guilt, starts to settle in. The silence becomes its own kind of noise, deafening. And here you stand, face to face with the central paradox of self-protection. The very same walls that so effectively keep the pain out also keep connection out. They don't negotiate, they don't filter. They are brutally, perfectly indiscriminate. That internal conflict you feel, that ambivalence, is not a personal failure, or you being too sensitive or too dramatic. It's a documented psychological outcome. Recent research on social disconnection confirms this exact experience. A persistent emotional limbo, suspended between the relief of safety and the gnawing anxiety of total isolation. So, you're not broken for feeling this. You're living a predictable consequence of your self-protection. If this deafening silence feels familiar, write "I understand" in the comments below. Not for me, for you, as an acknowledgement to yourself. But be warned, this emotional limbo is not a harmless temporary phase. Over time, this self-imposed solitude starts to lay down psychological scar tissue. It quietly rewires your ability to trust and your capacity for vulnerability. Subtle shifts you won't even notice until it's already too late. That kind of psychological scar tissue doesn't just sit there. It shows up in two distinct forms, quietly reshaping your internal landscape. The first is what psychologists call relational hypervigilance. It's a state of high alert. The pattern research on rejection sensitivity has been documenting for years. Your subconscious nervous system, conditioned by past hurts, now runs a constant threat scan in the background. A delayed text message doesn't read as a delay. It lands as the beginning of abandonment. A friend canceling plans doesn't show up as a simple schedule conflict. It feels like hard evidence of your unimportance. You live, honestly, on a knife's edge of perceived rejection, The second form is emotional atrophy. Think of vulnerability, as a muscle. If you stop using it, it weakens. By building walls to keep pain out, you stop practicing the expression of need, of connection, even of joy. The ability to say, I need help, or even this makes me happy, starts to feel foreign, and over time the emotions themselves grow faint, almost muted. This is where a devastating self-fulfilling prophecy takes shape. You feel you cannot connect, so you withdraw. Your withdrawal then atrophies the skills required for connection, which in turn seems to prove your original belief correct. It becomes a feedback loop that tightens with each passing month of silence. So if the fortress of silence becomes its own prison, and returning to the world feels impossible, what remains? This path is not isolation. It is not surrender. It is the deliberate mastery of a skill most are never taught, the art of staying. This art of staying is not some sentimental return to naive trust. It is not about walking back through every door you once had to close. It is a quiet, deliberate practice, often done in solitude, where you rebuild your world on your own terms. And it rests on 4 core principles. First, you reframe. You must accept the paradox that your withdrawal was not a character flaw. It was a logical, protective response to systemic overload. The nervous system's last resort, written deep into your subconscious biology. When you see it as a strategy, not a stain, you can finally begin to architect a new one. Second, you learn discernment. You begin to see others not as monolithic threats or saviors, but as they actually are. You learn to identify the cracked cups, those who can never be filled. And honestly, you stop pouring your energy into them. But you also train your eye for the safe harbors. The relationships, however few, that can hold your reality without breaking. This is an act of quiet observation, not judgment. Third, you communicate. This is the slow mastery of healthy boundaries. It is the art of learning how to say no without disappearing, how to express a need without apologizing for its existence. You state your limits early, clearly, and calmly, and not as a threat, but as a simple piece of information about how you operate. And finally, you learn to stay. Not for everyone, not everywhere, but in the places that matter, with the people who have proven they are safe harbors. You learn to stay even when it is imperfect, because you now have the tools to navigate that imperfection without sacrificing your core. You know this is not surrender. It is the highest form of self-preservation, grounded in the real work of attachment repair. This entire journey, from exhaustion to isolation to mastering the art of staying, circles back to one final painful truth about the price of empathy. And it is the one thought that proves you did not leave because you did not care. Here's the paradox. They didn't leave because they didn't care. They left because caring cost them too much. Ultimately, disappearing is an act of profound self-advocacy when you simply lack the tools for anything else. It's the final desperate move to protect what is left of your core. Learning to manage that cost is the work. You do it through discernment, through boundaries, through the art of saying no without vanishing. That is not weakness. It's the highest form of emotional maturity. It's the shift from merely surviving in isolation to finally thriving in connection. If this resonated with you, subscribe for more content that understands the overthinker's mind. And honestly, share this with someone who might need to hear it.